All right, welcome back. So today we are looking at one of my favorite topics in our philosophy class together, Plato's theory of recollection. Let me move my face out of the way just a little bit. Plato's theory of recollection. So this right here, this is Plato. This gives you a visual of essentially who we're talking about. But more importantly, let's look at Plato's theory, his idea of recollection. And remember, I want to go ahead and preface this. It's hard to distinguish exactly what comes from Plato and what comes from Socrates, because again, in every work of Plato, Socrates is the main character or has most of the dialogue. So Socrates is essentially a character in Plato's stories. And since Socrates didn't write anything down, it's hard to attribute to Socrates what is his thoughts, and it's even harder to attribute to Plato, which are his thoughts. So, just to preface that a little bit, all right, let's go ahead and jump in to the theory of recollection. Man, I really do enjoy discussing this. All right. Put me in the corner right there. All right. So, what is the theory of recollection? Okay. So, also called amnesis. The theory of recollection is the idea that humans possess every ounce of knowledge of the universe that exists, but in the exact moment that we are birthed into this world, that knowledge is covered or blanketed. I didn't want to say lost because lost isn't necessarily the right word. Lost means that it has to be it's gone somewhere. It's not exactly gone. It's not exactly gone, but that knowledge is covered or blanketed to the point where we spend our whole lives discovering or uncovering the innate knowledge that our soul possessed in the womb. That's a lot to wrap your mind around. I want you to think about that for a second. So, again, the theory, I guess in layman's terms, just to look at it. So, we know everything that there is to know about the universe before we are born. The moment that we are birthed, the moment that we are born, all of that knowledge is not accessible. I think that's probably the best word to use. Inaccessible. Not lost, not gone, but we can't access it. And so we spend our lives just kind of chipping away and finding like little glimmers of knowledge. But again, it is things that we already know. So we're not finding it out for the first time. We're not learning it. All we're doing is just kind of almost like remembering. Again, this is kind of a complicated thought. Not only a complicated thought or a complicated theory, but it's probably something that you may not have heard before. I'll be honest with you. Before I started really getting into Socrates, Plato, philosophy in general, I'd never really heard this idea. But the more I thought about it, and the more I continue to think about it, the more I see that it could be plausible. Now, am I to say that theory of recollection, this is exactly how we come to gain knowledge, how we come to learn, how we come to possess knowledge? I can't say that for sure. Yesterday we looked at theories of knowledge. So like theories of how we gain knowledge. And, from that, there's, several different theories as to why or how we come to understand knowledge and truth. There's some theories that dispel the idea that there even is like true knowledge or truth. I get true knowledge would be truth. That's, I guess, kind of the way I look at it. So the theory of recollection, well, there has to be something to know. So again, there are parameters around this theory. Okay, now let's look a little bit more in depth about how this theory comes about, because this sounds kind of off the wall. Like if you were to tell me this, if you were to come into my classroom, 5 years ago or 6 years ago when I first started teaching, this is my 6th year. So if you'd have come in my class 6 years ago and you told me this, I would think, man, this is where'd you get this from? Well, let's take a look so that you guys know where this isn't my own idea. Trust me, definitely not my own idea. So, how did this theory come about? So, in Plato's work known as on the soul, that is the main topic of discussion. The soul, not necessarily, it is not the theory of recollection. That is not the main argument. That's not the main premise. That's not the main conclusion. It is all centered on the soul, which is the title of this work. In this work, a dialogue begins centering around a student of Socrates named Phaedo. Now, Phaedo, again, being a student of Socrates, claimed that he was present at the death of Socrates, at his deathbed. Because if you remember, Socrates was sentenced to execution for corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety, so not worshiping the correct gods. And for this, Socrates was sentenced to death, sentenced to execution, and he was given hemlock or poison. And again, Socrates was given the opportunity to retract his statements, to essentially go back on his principles, and instead he drank the poison willingly. So now Phaedo is speaking in this story on the soul. Phaedo is speaking on the death of Socrates with a fellow philosopher, and so the way this story works, and I'm going to show this to you a little bit more tomorrow. I didn't give you any text today. I want you to really think about this theory. Tomorrow I'll give you a little more text, and we can kind of look at the conversation that is being had, because it is tied into what we're going to look at next. But Phaedo begins to, again, tell the story of Socrates on his deathbed. So in this story, Socrates is speaking. The main point, not even the main point, but what is probably focused on the most is that Socrates is not afraid of death. Now, how could this be? Well, this is the conversation that Phaedo is having. How could someone be unafraid of death and so willing to face it? Well, this goes back to what Socrates believes in his heart. And Socrates believed that death, and this is actually from the text of On the Soul, Socrates believed that death was the home of the soul. And Phaedo, again, in this work on the soul, spends his time retelling what Socrates said on his deathbed. So, again, we have Socrates who is facing death, not facing death, but is essentially experiencing death. And so the theory of recollection is one of the, I don't want to say epiphany, because I wouldn't say it's an epiphany, but one of the theories that Socrates speaks of when he is talking about the human soul. So let's take a look at the soul and how the theory of recollection comes from Socrates' argument or discussion of the soul. So the Socratic argument for the theory of recollection. I'm going to move myself again. There we go. All right. So again, Socrates' main argument or his main point on his deathbed is about the immortality of the soul. So in actuality, Socrates is much more concerned with justifying the belief that the soul is immortal with that conversation on his deathbed. It's not necessarily, he does not speak of the theory of recollection as the main point, but again, almost evidence for the immortality of the soul. So here's what Socrates says. Socrates argues, if humans are more than just a material body and indeed possess a soul, then that soul must be immortal. If the soul is immortal, then it must be eternal. And if the soul is eternal, then it is not bound by time, but bound in time. And if the soul began with time and will end with time, then the human soul must possess all the knowledge there is to know. Again, hard to wrap your mind around, but I want you to think about this. So if humans are more than just a body, which is what Socrates is, this is what his main point is. This is really what Phaedo is talking about in this conversation that he's having when he recollects Socrates' dialogue on his deathbed. So Socrates is saying that he's not afraid of death because death is just the detachment of his soul from his body. But he believes that the soul is eternal and the body uh, or excuse me, Socrates believes that the soul is immortal and the body is mortal. So he does not view this as necessarily death, the end. He just views it as the end of his human body, but not the end of his soul. So Socrates, again, says that, well, since he has a soul, then that soul must be immortal. Because if the soul continues to live even without the body, then the soul must be immortal. And if the soul cannot be killed, if the soul cannot be destroyed, then it must be eternal. We can look at this in terms of essentially like matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Like you're looking at laws of physics, or maybe misrepresenting that theorem, or I don't know whether to call it a theorem or theory, but it really doesn't matter. I may be representing that, but again, like you can't just like create like water molecules. Like that doesn't happen. Energy or not energy, but matter cannot be created nor destroyed. So, anyways, if the soul is immortal, then it must be eternal. Eternal, what that means is that again, it is not subject to time. It is not. Does not begin with time, or excuse me, it begins with time and ends with time. So as long as time exists, uh, again, I guess that's how we judge something to be eternal, is that it always has been and always will be, unless time ceases to exist. But again, that doesn't seem, I can't wrap my mind around that. So if the soul began with time and the soul will end with time, then the soul must have some knowledge that, again, we don't necessarily have, just like the ability to tap into at all times. The soul, if the soul has been in existence from the beginning of time and continues until the end of time, um, then the soul that we have within our bodies, again, there's some innate knowledge that is there. And so the theory of recollection talks about, well, we're not learning anything. Instead, what we're doing is that we are essentially tapping into our soul. We are tapping into our soul and we are learning or rediscovering something that we already knew before birth. That is what Socrates is essentially talking about when he says that death is the home of the soul. If something is not alive, we assume that it is dead. And the only way that we look at being alive is, again, a material body functioning. That's how, you know, I, I want to be like careful with my words, obviously, because we're talking about heavy matters. Um, we look at, the body, and as we said earlier, it is bound in time, or bound by time, excuse me. The human body, on average, I think in America today, the average human being lives somewhere around 80 years old, and that's kind of an aggregate of both men and women, though women tend to live longer than men. Um, is there more to a human being than just their body? And this is an argument, or this is a discussion that has gone on since the beginning of time. So maybe this discussion is eternal as well. The immortality or the existence of a soul. You have to imagine that people don't always act as if they. I shouldn't say they don't act as if they do have a soul, but they don't act as if they believe in an eternal soul. They don't behave maybe that way. And I'm not saying that I'm above that, because I'm sure it's been plenty of times where I've behaved in manners that, if if my soul is eternal, uh, and immortal and unlimited, well, I've definitely limited myself and and tried to limit other people, in different ways. So okay. Again, a lot to wrap your mind around, and it's hard to explain. It's easier to think about than it is to explain. I think that's kind of the case for a lot of philosophy, and why it is it's a hard class to teach, and you don't see many classes on philosophy in high school because it's hard to talk about. It's hard to explain exactly what is being portrayed. It's a lot easier just to kind of think about it and reflect on it, which is why I try to give you guys like some primary source stuff so you can read. I know that sounds crazy, but you can read, and then it's kind of filling the gaps of your own mind instead of someone else trying to fill those gaps, which is the part that I play in this. All right, let's look at our last slide. And all right, so kind of wrapping this up. I guess I'll put myself right here. So, kind of wrapping this up. In other words, according to the theory of recollection, you actually never learn anything new. You never have, and you never will. All that you will spend your life doing is simply rediscovering knowledge of the universe that you already possessed. Is this why we all have something that we have just naturally been good at and cannot explain why? Could the theory of recollection be the reason why people have deja vu? Deja vu is when you feel like you've dreamt something and then it happens. Uh, you know, I guess the way that we could look at deja vu in this sense is that, again, if your soul is eternal, then maybe you have kind of lived this moment before. That kind of takes us on a whole other avenue, more so in metaphysics. Is the theory of recollection responsible for the proclaimed moments of clarity in near death and end of life experiences? Those are good questions, but I don't have an answer for them. Maybe the theory of recollection is responsible for those, maybe not. But it's something that we have to think about. From here, so after today's assignment, in which I want you to kind of talk about something that you've been naturally good at and how you figured that out and how kind of that process. From there, we're going to look at Plato's theory of forms. And the theory of forms and the theory of recollection are closely related. But again, just speaking of today's assignment real quick, think of something that has just came natural to you, because that's essentially what we're talking about. This innate human knowledge is natural. It is natural. It is not something that that you have to, it is within. It is from within, which makes it natural. It's not something you have to get from the outside world, because that knowledge, again, due to the theory of recollection, is within you. It is innate. So, I want you to think about something that you're naturally good at. I'll 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 bring up a couple things that I've discovered that I'm naturally good at, and some things that I discovered that I'm not naturally good at. Uh, so, like, sports have always come like natural to me. Like, I can pick up like athletic events, athletic activities. Ever since I was a child, like playing basketball. Like, I realized kind of early on that I was better than some of the other kids, and I didn't understand why. Baseball felt the same way. I was younger. I was always like the youngest person on my team um, until really like my junior year of high school. I was always like the youngest player on the team, and not saying that made me like better than everybody else, because it didn't necessarily do that, but um, it was one of those things. Like, how am I like good at baseball to where I'm always the one of the younger ones playing with older guys? Why is that? How is that? Football, I was just kind of naturally good at it, and didn't really know why, didn't really know how. I mean, yeah, like being athletic and having like athletic prowess comes in handy, but where did that come from? Like, where did athletic instinct come from? I don't know. That's the thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know why I have been naturally good at those things, or why they just seem even and like not even like being like an overly athletic person. I look at athleticism in several different ways, but one of the ways I look at it is athleticism is your ability to pick up and do different things and be good at different things, different sports, different positions within those sports. Most people describe being athletic as like running fast and jumping high. I don't think that. I think that is athletic. That is athletic, or that is athleticism. Maybe that's probably the best way. It is athletic. It is something that an athlete can do. It is something that an athlete does do. But athleticism, I look at more so as the ability to, the skill aspect of it, maybe. But that's something that I've just kind of naturally been good at, and I don't know why. But I remember like kind of figuring this out, especially when I got like to middle school, and now you're playing like team games, or like playing kickball or something. Uh, Again, it, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. That's again some of these ideas, I guess, especially this theory of recollection, is it's hard to explain. It's hard to speak of. It's easier to write. It's easier to think. But if you think about it, so like me, like baseball just kind of came naturally, or football, probably football more than anything, just kind of came naturally. Why is that? Well, it could be again because I just possess athletic instinct. But where does that come from? If you look at the theory of recollection, it is something that I've already had, already knew, and I just discovered it maybe earlier than others. Maybe this is the reason why you have you know, people that are extremely successful early in life. Maybe they just rediscover, or not rediscover, but discover what they already possessed before others do. Maybe that's why, we typically think we know more than our parents. And then as we get older, we realize that our parents knew a lot more than we thought they did. And maybe they're just farther along that path of rediscovering or discovering that information. All right. So I want you guys, again, think about something you're naturally good at. Write on the theory of recollection from that perspective. And tomorrow we'll look at the theory of forms. I hope this is interesting to you. If not, I'm sorry, but this is philosophy. It'll be a good time. Trust me, and it'll give you something to think about. And having something to think about besides just kind of the everyday grind is a good thing. All right, see you guys tomorrow.